Welcome to the Inking Neon podcast. Inking Neon lights up your imagination, blending readings, author interviews, and book recs with the hard-earned insight of two writers who've spent decades teaching and creating. It's where the craft of writing gets electrified and ideas shine brighter. If you're chasing inspiration, this is your sign in lights. I'm Cullen McHale, a sci-fi writer and teacher of 15 years, and I'm here with Stuart J. Tanner.
Yes, here we are. We've talked about doing a podcast for quite some time, and now we're launching on that venture, and very enthusiastic about it as well, because lots to talk about and get into, and we're going to have lots of really interesting guests to learn from. Little creative community, little learning community. We're all going to learn from each other, and especially from the guests and everything. So really excited to get into this and do the podcast series. Yeah.
Today we thought we'd start by interviewing Stuart. And next week, Stuart will interview me. So welcome to the podcast, Stuart, co-host, longtime friend, excellent writer, journalist. Stuart has diverse life experiences, from going into Iraq with the first wave during Operation Enduring Freedom to going undercover in Brazil for multiple years as an investigative journalist, uncovering illegal logging operations. But on top of all of his enormous life experience as a journalist, Stuart is also an excellent sci-fi and fantasy writer. His book, Devas, is available now. And Stuart, did you want to open with a little story from the archives about yourself?
Well, yeah. I mean, I do think that one of the things that happens to people who want to write is that, they stock up on life experience. And certainly, I think I certainly did that from making documentaries and current affairs programs and everything. And then, there's this big resource in you that you want to use. And having experienced the real world, I definitely wanted to go into the world of sci-fi and fantasy. Having experienced it fully in many, many countries around the world, I mean, it is a wonderful combination of speculative fiction, of escaping into worlds that you create, escaping into alternative realities, but at the same time, in a way, expressing, your insights and ideas and exploring things that you've really experienced in the real world or are about to happen or could happen, and asking very interesting questions and then playing them out in the universe that you create, which is, if you've ever played role-playing games and, gotten so intensely into characters and the world that's being created in the role-playing and everything, or in a video game and everything, there's quite a bit of crossover there, because it's that level of involvement that you get engaged in when you're writing a science fiction book or a fantasy book, any book, but particularly speculative fiction, I think, because the world building aspect and the asking of the interesting questions is so crucial to it. So that's a really important and powerful reason why I write science fiction.
Once sitting around a campfire in Kathmandu, Stuart and I were having a dinner over a campfire in a hotel called Hotel Tibet in Kathmandu, just across the street from a major illegal, what was it? It was probably counterfeit currency operation. Stuart looked up from one of the best dumplings I've ever had, and he said, "You know what? Life is about writing and preparing to write." Those are the only two modes. That stuck with me.
Really attracted me to the whole proposition of a book like this with the main character is, one of the things that happens to you when you do documentary film is you're like thrown into another world, and you don't know everything about that world or the people or the culture or the situation or anything. I mean, you've done your research and everything, but documentary film, especially the sort of subjects that I was doing in the places that I was filming, you don't really know what's going to happen, right?
It's a process of exploration and
Yes.
discovery.
It's a process of discovery, and you're under this.
What writers might refer to as pantsaget.
Yeah, right. You're under this enormous pressure. You've been given this budget. You persuaded some commissioning editor or individual that you can go out there, you can get this story. It's out there somewhere. Whereas truly inside, you're really not sure whether you can. You might be able to. You're hopeful that you can, and then it's all on you. You land in this place, and you're like, oh boy, now I've got to really make it happen. It's like I've got my camera. I've got some crew with me or whatever, or maybe not. Sometimes you're on your own. And then you've got to find, the story and film it and capture it. And it's got to make sense, and it's got to build towards something that can be complete and whole and tell a story. So it's the opposite of fiction in the sense that, with fiction, you're in control as the writer, so you can set it all out, and you can decide what happens because you're the writer. You're the godlike figure that can do that. Whereas in documentary, it's much more a raw experience.
But is it really you deciding?
Well, it's a raw.
Is it really you deciding, or are you kind of?
I think one of the best things when you really get into a story and you're really immersed in it is it doesn't feel like it's you deciding. Actually, it feels like the world is deciding. Your characters are deciding, and they're kind of like indicating to you more than you to them, which I think is a really good immersive experience that you can get when you're writing. But yeah, I think that whole experience was the preparation for writing, because for you and for me, although we've done many other things, journalism and filmmaking and teaching and so on, writing probably is the first love in a way. The ultimate challenge of that space in which you can create anything, and it's on you what is created in that space and so on. So creatively, amazing challenge to take that on and create something that people want to read and find compelling, and a universe that they're interested in. So yeah, that's
just the trick, isn't it? It's easy enough to daydream, and your daydreams will of course always be informed by those stories which you love and which you've experienced, and by your own life experience and whatever issues challenge and activate you. But the real trick of being a science fiction and fantasy writer, and not just a journalist, just a journaler, big difference between a journaler and a journalist, is that sci-fi and fantasy writers are writing to an audience with the intent to entertain. That it's a product that you're producing that will be delivered to an audience, and hopefully they like it. And if they don't, then you can keep writing for yourself. But the real challenge is finding the story and then eliciting the story from your own imagination in such a way that it actually comes to a point, comes to some compelling movement, and brings an experience to the audience that they want. It's so easy for fantasies, for like daydreams, to become kind of compelling to the person who is thinking them because they're focused on them, but they're not really compelling to others, right? Like it's not an experience that other people necessarily want. When you're talking about putting together your story, it sounds like you're making a metaphor between the experience of a journalist sort of landing in a strange land, so to speak. It may not actually be a strange land, but it's always going to be foreign in some way, some new corner of your own land. and finding and exploring until you've discovered a story, and then tugging on the thread and putting it together. Um, and the process of writing your novel, do you feel like when you are writing your novel, you are seeing it as a visitor in a strange land, where your subconscious is producing a world and you're kind of exploring it?
Well, actually, in the case of this particular story, yes, because the original idea came for it when I was flying into Iraq on the first sort of. I had been commissioned to go there to do media work. This is after the uh, 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 being there as for the BBC and sort of embedded for the war phase, as it were. So and there's only one way to get in there, and it was a military aircraft, and no one tells you anything. All right, you just you go and you get on. You say, go to this place and be there at this certain time, and then you're there, and then someone says, right, over there, and points to this aircraft, and you get on the aircraft, and it's like the entire aircraft is stripped out. So, and literally, there's just the skeletal remains of some chairs that you can sit in, and everything else is gone. And you fly in darkness with just these emergency lights strips down the center of the aircraft. And of course, there's various reasons why this is all done in this particular way. And then as we were flying into Baghdad, I was looking out the window, and this is again going to be dropped into this whole new world, and already you're having experiences that you didn't expect, and things are happening that you really don't know most of the time what's going on. And what they don't tell you is how they sort of land an aircraft like that at an airport in Baghdad, and they don't land it in the usual way. What happens is that they stay really high, and then just before reaching the airport, the airplane dives very, very sharply, so that it's an incredibly fast descent. So imagine you're on this aircraft; it's all stripped out. There's all you can see. It was like dusk, so there's a dusty kind of world outside with there's the orange sun in the distance and everything. There's strip lights going flashing down the center of the aircraft, and suddenly it just dives down like that. And no one's told you about this, so as far as you're concerned, something's gone horribly wrong. So you think. So you're holding on to your seat like that as the aircraft is diving. You think, oh no, this is not how I want to go. It's the end and everything. But no one else seems to be panicking. So, because there's these dudes in their, military garb and stuff and everything, and their sidearms stretched out, listening to music or smoking or something. And then the aircraft just pulls up at the last moment and lands on the airport. And that to me was a moment I thought, yeah, that's a good way to start a story. I mean, that whole thing of your character thrown into this situation and gonna have to find the way in this new dynamic. They have a mission. I chose for Devas is classic kind of detective who has to go and solve some murders on a distant space station. Never been there before, haven't really been off-world from where they are before. So everything's going to be new, everything's going to be different, everything's going to work in a different way. It's going to be really, really challenging all the way along, with many, many surprises. And I think I just, having had that experience, and it continued that way, I thought, well, yeah, I want to take this and I want to write that. I want to put that into a book, that whole experience into a book. into, the main character going from being someone who's not an expert. I mean, he's sort of like, the main character, Madge Jensen, the detective, he's not a particularly brilliant detective. He's kind of mid-tier. He's okay, but he's not like the best that the department has and everything. They literally just throw him at the case because they're not particularly interested. They don't think it's particularly important. This distant space station and everything. It ends up being incredibly important. Of course, he ends up in the center, right in the eye of an incredible storm right across the Federation. But no one knows that or expects that at the beginning. So that arc was one that was, exceptionally appealing, really, for me.
Just that vibe of being. There's nothing like being ordered onto a military airplane to give you the sense that you are a very small person caught up in something very, very large.
Mm.
And that sense, almost Lovecraftian sense of the scale of the things that are moving around you, being so much greater than any human individually, and so strange and alien too. For those who might be wondering about why the airplane does that, it's because they want to stay inside the range of shoulder-mounted anti-aircraft missiles for the least amount of time possible.
Yeah,
because they're worried that there might be somebody out near the airport with a missile, and they don't want to be in that person's line of sight for any longer than they absolutely have to. So they'll dive right through the range of those missiles and then pull up right at the last minute and come to a screeching halt on the airport tarmac.
Yeah, and after landing, sort of got off and then, channeled through airport. My lift turned up, and we're driving. We have to get to one of the main US bases there. And as we're driving, like, it's not funny really, but it kind of is at the same time in a dark kind of way, and that's the interesting sort of mix combination that a writer gets fascinated in a way. The seriousness and the absurdity and the dark humor and the tragedy all kind of mixed up and happening in the same day. So as we were driving in, like 14 mortars came raining down, exploding. So you're driving into
Welcome to Iraq.
and these explosions are going off, and the real thuds as well. And it's like, welcome to the mission.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Well, with that, let's transition. So,
yeah,
yeah, good luck. I hope you like your adrenaline in the morning. Yeah.
Adrenaline.
So Stuart's book, Devas, is got definitely a character of that experience that you're describing. I loved the book, found it very compelling. The main character is a detective, not a journalist. But the experience that, like what Stuart's talking about, that invitation to experience a new world where things are very different and risks are much greater, that is very much on offer in Devas. Let's pivot and let's get into our theme today, which is characters. So, Stuart, do you have... Let's get started with just 3 characters who you think are really compelling examples of a well-written character.
Well, in science fiction, I'm going to go for some classics. So I really do think that, Deckard in Blade Runner is a really interesting character and pretty well realized, I'd say. And I love that combination of, like, at one level you're exploring kind of deep metaphysical questions and about what it is to be human and so on. and how are you going to deal with a you create something that's being created, which is not human, but it's so human and in some ways is more advanced than a human. So how are you going to deal with that? Now that was like written many decades ago, and of course, slowly but surely, the reality of humanity moving towards eventually living with a non-human other species, intelligent species, is, I mean, we're on that path. No question we're on that path. I'm not just talking about artificial intelligence, which still is machine intelligence. I'm talking about things like programmable biology and advanced sort of understanding of genetics and the potential. The real story of the century is not going to be any one of those things. It's going to be the combination of all of them. The real story of the century is AI combined with robotics and programmable biology. And
we're getting into real transhumanism.
Yeah. Right.
So what about Deckard makes him, I mean, the experience you're describing that Deckard has kind of tracks to your own description of what makes the experience interesting.
Rooted in a very recognizable trope, right? And I never really worry about that, just because someone is a sort of recognizable trope or even a larger kind of archetype. It's what you do with it that's really important, I think. You're never really going to escape the trope minefield because there's so many tropes out there and you're bound to fall into one of them. But so what? Don't worry about it.
We think in tropes.
Yeah,
it's silly to think that you could escape tropes. That's the way your brain is wired.
So it's the film noir detective and so on and everything. But then it's layered with this, this mission to chase down replicants who have come from off-world, and they have a mission also, and that's a great opposition. His mission against their mission. Their mission is to go and meet their maker, and his mission is to destroy them.
Is to send them to meet their maker, so to speak.
the ultimate one. The opposition is a fantastic opposition in that respect. And at the center there is the questions of humanity. So you got a beautiful kind of anchoring in a recognizable trope, anchoring in a sort of like a recognizable mission, the solving of this, chasing down these people who are undercover, infiltrating society, and they're bad news, as it were. Right.
The fear of the replicant, of the duplicate, the infiltrator, right?
Right. But the arc is beautifully sort of explored through a relationship with one of those replicants, but it's a replicant that doesn't know that they're a replicant. Right?
And some would argue so is he.
Yes. Ultimately, there's also that question that, use a monster to chase a monster kind of idea, right? So
isn't it
who's going to be the best person to chase a replicant? A replicant, ultimately. But
that question of is he a replicant, to me that always seems like kind of an important aspect of the film, regardless of whether he is or not. Because, at least in my experience, any journey you go on that is an investigation that brings you face to face with some existential question, you push on that world, but it pushes on you too. The questions you're asking of the environment, you also ask of yourself. You start to wonder, well, maybe I am like them. Maybe I am this way. You start to see yourself in those around you. And you must. That's where your empathy is kicking in and your sympathy. So the question of, is he a replicant? To me, that is the fact that the film asks that question. I don't really feel that the book particularly asks that question, but the film does. And I think that does a good job of kind of representing how that investigation And I think at this point we've kind of landed on a theme here where we're talking about unfolding narratives as investigations, whether it's journalism or as um, police work. An investigation is going to involve an investigation into yourself too, almost automatically.
Yeah, just to finish on Deckard, because I think it's a really important point that in terms of the development arc of the character, of course, what ultimately happens is that his life is spared by a replicant. And, you can't know for sure whether that was an act of humanity by the replicant or not, because they're a replicant. But it certainly felt like a moment of humanity and compassion. And it was that scene with, where he talks about everything as experience and it's just going to disappear in the rain. Okay. Well, ultimately, that's mortality, and we all suffer from that. But then there's that it links across to Descartes and say it sort of spares him. And it's beautifully layered, that, because it's humanity? It could be. Is it because he's himself a replicant? Or is it just that final act that someone has borne witness to the end of that replicant's life? So it's beautifully layered, and it's very, very satisfying sort of, not ultimate conclusion to the story, but it's a very satisfying kind of moment. It works so well.
Which
it's remembered because of it.
Which definitely brings me to, if I were to list my favorite character in the Blade Runner film, it would be Batty. The one that really stands out to me, I mean, Deckard is a capable vehicle for the audience's exploration of the space, and in some ways that's what a protagonist has to be. It's just sort of a blank vehicle to carry the audience through the narrative. It's why Harry Potter is the most boring character in Harry Potter, and Frodo is a pretty much blank slate for most of the Lord of the Rings. Deckard is a capable protagonist. He grapples with the ideas he encounters. But the character who really kind of steals the show is the one who is inhabiting that space, not just witnessing it, whose conflict, whose like fundamental paradox of being an inhuman who longs for life. He's not alive, ? And longs for his life. Actually, he's mostly driven by a desire for revenge. But once he gets his revenge, he becomes something else. And it's a very compelling character to have that paradox at the heart of him, where he's at one and the same time horrifically violent and also deeply engaging and sympathetic, whose anger is clearly justified.
Beautiful. It's beautiful, and I agree. And it's the fallen angel story to a certain degree. Although, ironically, it's not human. It's of another species, but then so is a fallen angel. And of course, it's the fallen angel is the one that challenges the authority of the almighty creator, right? And in this case, wants to challenge the creator. Give me my life. Give me what is my due. You set a date for me for when I die. Well, that's the human condition also, right? There is a date.
The atropos, yes.
Runs out eventually. So if there is a creator, I don't know whether there is or not, personally, then that's their responsibility. Right? So, the fallen.
So one might be justified in feeling some anger.
Exactly.
Under some circumstances. So here's the real question, though, Stuart. We can sing the praises of Blade Runner all we want. Someone definitely rolled what a gamer would call a critical success in the production of that particular script. But if we're setting out to do it ourselves, we can hardly just imitate, to the end of the line. So where do you start from when you're trying to create a compelling character?
Well, one of the You mentioned Harry Potter, and you mentioned what was the other character?
Frodo from the Lord of the Rings.
Right. Yeah. Well, one of the fundamentals of a main character that often gets repeated, and there's a very good reason why, but it's one that I particularly like and are drawn to, is, in a sense, it is the character who is, I wouldn't say that they're the least interesting, but they're certainly not the most interesting. To a certain extent, they're a tabula rasa. They're like a blank, to a certain degree, a blank page. To a certain degree, they Star Wars live on a farm and on a desert planet and haven't done much other than some farming. Or Frodo, same story. Or any of the sort of these characters that go through phenomenal kind of transformations and arcs. I'm also very attracted to that. I like I like the whole thing of a character moving from that, not exactly innocence, but it's certainly, you they do not know really about the world, and they do not know really about how the world really works, and so they have a vast kind of quantity of ignorance. Now, I think in a way it's not their fault, but that's the situation. And that is going to change massively and fundamentally, as a result of what happens in the story. I think there's something particularly appealing in the speculative fiction world because partly it's about the nature of the world, of the universe, and how it really works, that's being created. Even in Dune, that's the case to a certain extent. Not really knowing how the empire works and the politics and who's behind it and how the whole thing has been set up and by whom and what's being played out. So
There's a real logic to having your point of view character be a little bit innocent.
yeah,
And it's very simple to understand why all point of view characters tend to be a little bit innocent. It's because the audience doesn't know anything.
yeah,
So if you're going to have a point of view character that is the vehicle for the audience's experience of the world, it's very helpful as a matter of craft to have that point of view character ask silly questions. Like, what is the Dominion anyway?
yeah,
Or what is a replicant? Or things that they need to be a little bit innocent so that they can have the world explained to them so that the reader is not left entirely out of the cold. And it's not that they have to be a total ingenue sort of.
yeah,
They can. Luke is in Star Wars is a capable pilot. He knows the Empire is bad. He's been fighting the Sand People since he was a kid. He's a pretty capable guy. But he's also young and very optimistic. And there's going to be a lot of stuff. It's actually a point of subversion in the original Star Wars movie that Han Solo assumes Luke is an ignorant farm boy, but in fact, Luke is an excellent pilot. And so Han Solo is routinely explaining things to Luke that Luke already knows. And that can become a point of banter. But yeah, there's a simple reason for why the main character tends to be a little bit innocent. It's just so that they can have the world explained to them. And if you don't have that in your in your point of view character, you're going to need it in some supporting character. Who can ask the silly questions that the audience needs to know the answers to. Otherwise, you will end up having to explain things to the camera, which you really don't want to do.
yeah. And I mean, for me personally, I combine that with what pretty tight third person perspective. So, you experience the world as they do. They're your torch in the darkness, your flashlight rather in the darkness. And you only see what that flashlight sees. And as they move through their world, they're literally painting it for you. And so it begins to fill out as they experience it. I personally find that a particularly compelling kind of thing to write, because if you're really immersed in that character, you really, even though you know this world because you've created it, you are genuinely, it's amazing how you can genuinely feel what the character feels when they have their first revelations. Oh my goodness me. So those people, they're not really in control. They're being controlled by these people over here. And they're far worse. And you genuinely experience those revelations along with the character, and it's quite powerful. And you can the
Do
reactions
you have
is powerful.
do you have any advice for a writer who is worried that they might pollute their character's perspective of the world with their author's knowledge of the world? In other words, that they know that the villain is not really in charge, that someone else is, that, but the character doesn't know this. So how do you stay in the point of view of the character to explore the world?
Mm. I've never, yeah, that doesn't, I haven't found that to be a problem. It's an interesting thing. It's almost like, um, I think one of the things that happens if you write, and you write a lot, and as we know, one of the best things you can do in writing is write a lot. I mean, there's no substitute for that. I think that one of the things you get good at is that,
Heard it here first.
yeah, yeah. One of the things you get good at is, like, when you've got your plotting kind of thing brain, you can switch that on and, like, plan and plot and figure out all these things. And then you've got your other part that's looking after another aspect of storytelling. But when you write the actual character and you sort of, like, re-immerse yourself in the story, you can really get into a mode where it's almost as for you those things are, like, going to be genuinely surprising. And so I don't find that they kind of, like, pollute the process of, being in the moment with the character or characters, because obviously they get allies or have other people that they're working with or working against and so on. But I do think one of the key things, one of the real key things with what really makes something engaging in terms of your main character is that the other characters that you create are very genuine and well thought out and executed characters that have a real world point of view, and that represent themselves and that point of view very well and very thoroughly. One thing that I don't like, if I read a book and it's like, is if the good person is not is and the antagonist or whoever is just a veneer of what they should be. It's like a thin version of what they should be, is an unexplored version of what they should be. So to give an example, if there's a pilot that's become a smuggler and is kind of like, you know, kind of needed to be an ally, but they're not particularly reliable and they're pretty bad and everything, um, that's not just a side little character of, no, that's an opportunity to show an aspect of the world for why that essentially a family loving person who had a marvelous situation and was very happy became a pretty aggressive and out there and quite destructive smuggler, right? Then they're an interesting character, even though they're a side character, because they're going to challenge your main character in a specific way, but it's not just a very badass kind of smuggler kind of thing. And so each of the characters that surround your character kind of come in at different angles and push them in different ways and pull them in different ways, like that.
I I think that I hear what you're saying as being a call to ground even your side characters, even your relatively minimally present characters, in a realistic three-dimensional depiction of a human life. And do you have any exercises that you might recommend to writers to employ, like practical writing tips when they are looking to achieve that end?
Yeah, yeah. I'd say that the number one thing I would say is that don't try and create them on the fly. You should create them prior to writing. I mean, I do think that this is I personally think this is an important aspect of craft. I mean, people have their different ways of writing, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another, and all the rest of it. But I think what is key is that you have your notes, and you really have written up those notes about that character. So even if you're not going to use the fact that once upon a time had this marvelous family and kids, and they were very happy in this, community on this one particular planet, but it all got messed up by some bad people and everything. Even if you're not going to use it, it's in the notes, so that you've done the work of like, it's a creative work, right? You've fashioned that individual. How much you're going to use of it, you don't know. And you might use all of it, or it might never come up that you had that family and all the rest of it. But it might. There might be just a moment where that revelation kind of really works.
I agree. And I would say that maybe 99 times out of 100, when I've written a detailed life story for a minor character, I have in fact abandoned it completely and given them a completely different life story in the course of working on the book. Maybe 99 times out of 100. Every now and then I'll open some old folder of character backstories and discover some artifact that is just completely wrong. Oops, that's not even a side character anymore. That character became a main character. And I made up this backstory for them, and it's completely wrong. I didn't use any of that. But the practice of developing detailed, nuanced life stories for characters, once you've done it enough, it quickly becomes very easy to do it intuitively while you're working. The crucial thing is to see them as three-dimensional beings with enough complexity that they respond organically to the things that are happening around them. I'm curious, Stuart. You've talked about some things that you don't really like when characters are sort of flat. Do you where are some places where authors sometimes go very wrong in developing their characters? Is there a common mistake that you often catch?
Well, I wouldn't, without saying it's wrong or right or whatever. I mean, I just give you my reaction to some things that I think are, happen quite a bit these days. And that is, I look at a story and I think of it in terms of three major things: logos, pathos, and ethos. Logos is the logic. It's like in any story, you ask questions and which you'll eventually answer. And the plot tells you what the questions are and how they get answered, basically, mostly, and all the key events and everything. Pathos is the emotional kind of, track of the story and all its different characters and all the rest of it. Ethos, in the context of story, not rhetoric, is to do with moral compass, the ethical center of a character. And that's where I find consistently things go awry. That character that's being created and that expectations have been set up for and everything, they do things suddenly which are, break the ethos of the character in terms of what's been established and the foundation and expectation that goes with that. And you might think, well, yeah, but then that's an interesting twist and everything. But I often find it problematic because, we talk about things being out of character. I think that's one of the ways that things are very out of character. If the shift in the ethos, the compass needle of the ethics, values, core of the character shifts without foundation. And I think that can literally destroy the story right there, because it's a breach, it's a break. Your reader may be okay with it, but usually that's like, who is this person? No.
A sense of betrayal.
Yes, often goes with a sense of betrayal. Yes.
It's fans will often really rage when they feel like a character made a decision that was out of character for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think that case could be made for the end of the Game of Thrones series. I don't think there was enough foundation for what happened.
I think that, the panning of the final season of Game of Thrones is now universal. But that point that it has to do with the ethics of the character and keeping in your head as the author where these characters place their values, where their moral compass points. What do they value? What sort of people do they value? What sort of person do they want to be? How do they try to live up to that? And then where I see what you're saying, and I think that's a really interesting insight, because people complain a lot about characters doing something out of character and they really feel betrayed by it. But I don't think they could articulate why, or even necessarily what to do about it as an author to avoid it. But I think you've given a kind of an interesting answer where, as an author, if we pay attention to the ethics of our characters, what villains have ethics too. In fact, all of the worst atrocities in history were perpetrated by people who thought they were doing the right thing, or at least had constructed some kind of ethical framework to justify what they were doing. So, where does their moral compass point? And understanding that, and especially for your villains, but also especially for your protagonists, can help you avoid a situation where your character does something because it seems like an interesting twist to you, or it seems like it might further the story, or it seems like a surprise. And it certainly will increase it will increase the drama for somebody to suddenly do something that's against their ethics. That's a twist on what they would normally do. But unless you've built that into the narrative and we can see how it builds up that they're thinking about doing something, or they're tempted by doing something that's against their ethical code or different from their normal ethical framework, how they've started to consider other points of view, and then some pressure builds on them to shift them. And I think, for my own 2 cents to add to this, Stuart, is I very much agree with your idea on ethics, and I would add to it just that the ethical positions that the characters take in real life, people sometimes just do very random stuff. Sometimes people in real life do whatever is convenient and then use ethics to retroactively justify it. And this can result in people being very mean to each other and reacting with violence or cruelty when they really wouldn't normally think of themselves that way, and then justifying it retroactively. But in books, people should not behave that way, especially your protagonist, because if their behavior is as random as a real person, the audience will feel betrayed by them a lot. And it's hard to let somebody be your point of view on a world where you want to spend time. And bearing in mind that your protagonist is the window into this world. They are the vehicle that the audience is occupying. Inside this one character are the 10,000 readers who are reading this book, all watching the world through their eyes. And if that character is somebody that the readers can't trust, and not in like a fun way, but in a like every now and then he just betrays you, then they're not going to want to keep going. They're not going to trust you as a writer. No, it's different to have an unreliable narrator. Unreliable narrator is a different thing. Unreliable narrators can be really fun. That's when the author and the readers are in a contract that the point of view is unreliable, and where the world that is expressed by the point of view character may not be this world that's actually happening even in the story. And that brings the audience in on it. But if you just like have a character suddenly betray their ethics, that can really undermine your trust relationship with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all that. And just to add a little bit to that is that we're not talking about necessarily having a protagonist that's good.
Right.
This applies to the anti-hero as well. It applies to a protagonist who's bad. Often if a protagonist is bad, is because the world is worse. So, it's the relativity.
Or at least they see it that way.
At least they see it that way. They may be right, they may be wrong. They might be unreliable. But, at least it makes sense, So that's the thing. It's like with the other aspects, it's the world that you place them in. It's that needle that you're moving backwards and forwards. It doesn't matter where it is. It could be on the wonderfully beautiful person, good part of the spectrum. It could be the middle. It could be to the other side. Not such a great individual, something. But there's the rules still. It's difficult to talk about rules, but I think that it still applies nonetheless. What fascinates me about this is it's not what you're thinking about. It's not what you're aware of necessarily when you're reading, when you're watching something. But you're following the story, the character, the events, the visuals and all the rest of it. And maybe one's not so conscious of the value kind of dynamics and ethos dynamics being played out. But boy, if that gets missed up, you certainly will get a reaction. Yeah.
Yes, it's subconscious until it goes wrong.
Yeah.
Well, Stuart, we've got about 5 minutes left. Did you want to read a little from Devas?
See if I can get on.
If you're unsure where to start, I would recommend the beginning.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Yeah, why not? So Detective Jensen, let's go to the top here. Chapter 1, Gion, Federation Homeworld, 2469. Detective Jensen peered through the rain-slick canopy of his aerial patrol vehicle, the engine's low hum the only sound cutting through the storm. Below, the sluggish grey waters of the Oran River dragged rust-streaked fishing boats towards the sea. Navigation buoys marked narrow lanes through the current, their dim lights barely visible in the gloom. The dashboard clock read 6:18. It was dawn, but the storm smothered the light, extending the restless night. Jensen stirred from a fitful sleep just as the APV broke through the base of a cloud bank. His eyes widened at the sight of Kargila city, a sprawling expanse of flickering lights and ceaseless motion. Only the black void of the Larigo estuary, 3 kilometers ahead, interrupted the series ranks of skyscrapers. A bolt of lightning split the sky, casting the city in stark, skeletal relief. For a few seconds, the glass-walled towers shimmered with fractured light. Thunder followed, a rolling growl that rattled the canopy of the APV as it descended toward the chaotic metropolis. Jensen guided the craft through a canyon of skyscrapers, passing colossal neon-colored holograms that pulsed in the torrential rain. Advertisements from far-off world colonies promised new beginnings beneath alien suns. Others showcased cybernetic enhancements in vivid detail. Women's eyes shifted from organic brown to gleaming gold, a man's arm morphing into a sleek exoskeletal limb. A massive android loomed above the street, its voice booming through the storm, extolling the latest breakthroughs in biogen chip technology. Rain blurred the holograms as they slipped behind him, their vibrant images dissolving into mists of color. With a flick of his wrist, Jensen activated a priority signal. Traffic in the aerial lane slowed to a halt, clearing a path for the APV to slot in behind a taxi. The line of vehicles stopped at the next intersection, where a red light bathed everything in an eerie glow. Jensen looked down at pedestrians huddled beneath storefront awnings and into the shadowed recesses of office buildings, their silhouettes stark under the streetlights. Steam from geothermal vents drifted through the crowd, cloaking them in veils of vapor. Rain hammered down on a patchwork of umbrellas, each one covered with animated graphics that rippled and glitched in the downpour. Jensen tapped a Kush herb smoke out of a crumpled pack and lit it with a slim silver lighter. "Good morning, Ariel," he said in a gravelly voice. A hollow of a young woman wearing a white police tunic appeared above the dashboard. The keenness in her eyes belonged to someone who didn't need to sleep. "Good morning, Detective Jensen." "I've picked up a new case." "I know." "I'm sure you knew before I did," he said, dropping the lighter into a cup holder. "They woke me at 5 to tell me." "I believe it's a serial murder case," Ariel said, cranking up an eyebrow. He took another pull and held in the smoke until he felt the soothing effects of the herb. "The prime suspect is dead. I've got to interview his spectral." "You don't like interviewing spectrals, do you?" "No, I don't. The spectral is at a life science vault. Show me the closest one to Nolka Cafe on 64th. The location of nearby life sign vaults appeared on the nav computer's street map. He finger-poked the icon of the one nearest to the cafe and selected the fastest route. The engines surged and the cabin shivered as the APV changed lanes. "Do you know why they gave me this case, Ariel?" "I don't." Jensen pressed a button to lower the driver's window. The wind rushed in, obliterating a wisp of smoke near his lips. "What a shitty day," he shouted as he threw out the still-burning stub. A few embers blew back into the vehicle and settled on the black fabric of his coat. He swept them off with his hand. "Wearing." The comm screen flashed with an incoming video call. "Open." Mara was sitting on the edge of her bed, looking at lines of computer code floating in front of her. Her long, slim legs dominated the screen as she placed her table on the floor close to her feet. "Where are you going, Mads?" "I'm on my way to interview a spectral at the Life Science Vault." "That's a rookie assignment, isn't it?" "It should be. It's a new case. 6 murders on Ganymede Station." Mara looked down at the tablet, causing her hair to fall forward and shadow her face. "Is it a serial killer?" "Maybe." "But they're dead." "Yes, probably." She picked up the tablet, smearing the image until it settled again on her face. Her eyes were cornflower blue this early in the morning. "You've interviewed spectrals before," she said as she moved lines of code through the air with her fingertips. "Of course, but I don't like doing it." "Why's that?" "Because they make shit up." "Doesn't everybody?" "Yeah, But people are no good at lying when their emotions are involved, and their emotions are always involved. It's difficult knowing when a spectral is lying. You just don't get a gut feeling about it. It sounds like an interesting challenge. It isn't, trust me. Attention check the vehicle's progress on the map. I'll be done in an hour. Do you want to meet at Nolka if you're free? I'll try. It's a great day for steamed dumplings. I've been thinking about them all morning. Seriously? Let's go to Helium tonight and come back here. Her eyes lit up with the thought of carnal delights. I liked that plan. She blew him a kiss and ended the call.
That was Devas by Stuart J. Tanner, available on Amazon. And with that, thank you for joining us and thank you for your company. This is Inking Neon, signing off.
Yeah, and we'll be back.